A Neo-Jungian mapping of the psyche, understanding inner geography and our challenge of individuation. A lecture by Robert Moore. In this presentation, Dr. Moore introduces his discoveries of the deep structures of the archetypal self. This decoding of the diamond body and mapping of the great code of the psyche are foundations of the transcendent function. Central to the balancing of opposites, these deep structures have implications for psychological development and spiritual growth.
My name is David Hett. I'm the Minister of Religious Life and Learning here at First Community Church, and very proud that the Jung Association of Central Ohio originated out of First Community Church with a bunch of other people from the community 20 years ago. But it's one of those elements of First Community that I'm very proud of, which is our long history of psychological spiritual search. And so really pleased to have you all here tonight. And I know that when Gina asked me to introduce Robert Moore to you, it was really because for the past 9 years I've been on the board of the Jung Association and have been trying to get them to bring Robert Moore here. So I'm sure that this is actually my punishment for it, but I was thinking that it's kind of like the punishment you give to a bad child acting out in school by expelling them. You know, it really is a great thing. So I'm honored to be able to do this evening. And actually, I've known about Robert Moore for many years, although he doesn't know that I've known him. So I guess I'm kind of an intellectual stalker. But, and I was thinking that was probably better than the rock and roll groupie idea, particularly because it really doesn't fit that archetypes of mature masculine that I studied under him. So, but I went to seminary at at Northwestern University in Chicago, and so I was part of a Chicago consortium of seminaries back in the mid-'70s that included Chicago Theological Seminary. So I had already begun hearing about Robert Moore at that time. And then it turned out that my cousin did a DMin, Doctor of Ministry program, through Chicago Theological Seminary, and his advisor was Robert Moore. So I actually got to meet you one time with my cousin Patrick. And then that interested me so much that I went to a workshop at the Chicago Jung Institute on Jung and spirituality that Robert presented. And finally, in 1990, I traveled out to Kirkridge Retreat Center in Pennsylvania to really kind of hear him give the rollout on his work on the archetypes of the mature masculine, which was a wonderful experience for me. And so I've really followed his work, although when I read you some of the titles of the later work, you'll see that I've had to really rely on my friend David Robinson with his PhD in Jungian studies to make sure I really knew what was going on with Robert Moore. So, enough for that, and I want to give you the formal introduction. Dr. Robert Moore is the Distinguished Service Professor of Psychology, Psychoanalysis, and Spirituality at the Graduate Center of the Chicago Theological Seminary, where he's the founding director of the new Institute for Advanced Studies in Spirituality and Wellness, an internationally recognized psychoanalyst and consultant in private practice in Chicago. He has served as a training analyst at the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago and is director of research for the Institute for Integrative Psychoanalysis and Psychotherapy and the Chicago Center for Integrative Psychotherapy. Author and editor of numerous books in psychology and spirituality, he lectures internationally on his formulation of a Neo-Jungian psychoanalysis and integrative psychotherapy. His most recent books include The Archetype of Initiation, Sacred Space, Ritual Process, and Personal Transformation, The Magician and the Analyst, The Archetype of the Magus in Occult Spirituality and Jungian Psychology, and Facing the Dragon, Confronting Personal and Spiritual Grandiosity. He is currently working on a number of books, including his Decoding the Diamond Within, Archetypal Structures and the Fragmentation and Integration of Personality. So just by those last titles, you know that Robert Moore will be presenting a very intellectual discussion, but in my experience, also very intelligible and stimulating and if my past history is any example, also very provocative as well, but really also eminently practical for the soul's journey. So I wish you would welcome with me Dr. Robert Moore.
Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight with you and talk about things that I love to think about with groups like this and in my own study. I have spent a lot of time when I was a young, it's been a long time, when I was a young scholar and aspiring psychotherapist, way back a long time ago, I had gotten very, very fascinated with the task of trying to carry forward Jung's research into the collective unconscious. That was in the late 60s, mid to late 60s and early 70s, and I had no real idea at that time how much that quest would be an ongoing quest for me, and so getting an opportunity to share with you some of the, very briefly tonight, some of the parameters of my research into the concept of the archetypal self in Jung, and to offer my ways of thinking about the archetypal self and its relationship to the ego and to other aspects of personality. So we'll be going over a lot of stuff very rapidly tonight, but hopefully there'll be time before we wrap up. We've promised to get you out of here by 9 o'clock, and so I'm going to jump in and present for quite a while here, and then we'll have some time for questions and for some dialogue before we leave for the evening. If that's all right with you, we'll proceed. Okay. I just want to say before starting how much I appreciate all the work that's been done by the folk of the Jungian Association and the wonderful hospitality of this grand old church with such a great heritage. So let me just jump right in here. Carl Jung is really quite radically different in his approach to the psyche than other models of psychology, as you may know if you've had a chance to study Jung. In recent years, there's been a lot of pressure in Jungian circles to try to sort of reduce the sense of differences between Jung's psychology and other schools of psychoanalytic thought. I am not one of those who feel that that's the way to go for the future of Jung's psychology, and so I want to be speaking tonight about what I think is are key assumptions upon which Jung works, and the way that we can be thinking about carrying those forward. What we're looking at here is an image of the axis mundi. Now, in mythical traditions and spiritual traditions throughout the world, there was always a sense, and I refer you to the work of Mircea Eliade, the great historian and phenomenologist of religion, who was the single person who has done the most in the study of world spiritual traditions to point to the role in world spirituality of a sense of a center out there. A center, I like to say, with a capital C. The quest for the center out there is at the heart of world spiritual traditions. And in Jung's psychology, unlike any other psychology, there is a sense of a center beyond the ego. For Jung, there is not simply one center in the personality, the I. There's not simply the I. So many psychologies today emphasize the what we used to call ego psychology. They've got different labels now, but almost all of them focus on trying to help build the ego of the personality and to strengthen the I of the personality in relating to the various challenges of human life. Jung's psychology has, from the very beginning, and I think it is a fundamental assumption, is that there are two centers in the psyche. One has to be developed. That is the ego, the capacity to have a stable sense of I. But the archetypal self, which we're addressing tonight, was seen by Jung as a center beyond the I. And Jung's quest for his entire career was to come to an understanding of the role of the self in human life, the archetypal self, and to understand the importance of the I coming to relate to the archetypal self. A organizing center in the personality, we could say two things. That the archetypal self is an organizing center that contains a blueprint, a primordial image of wholeness and of integration in the psyche. And another thing that often is not emphasized as much as it should be, but it was implicit in Jung's work, is that the archetypal self, the center outside of the I in the psyche, was an enormous energy generator. And so we'll be thinking about those different aspects of the self this evening. But one of the things that I want to just put as a frame here is the emphasis that for Jung's psychology, there is a center outside the I. Now, in the ancient world, as Jung would put it, people projected that center out on many different objects. I like to point out that they're projected on sacred mountains all over the world. I have another presentation in which I show people the various archetypal images of the center out there. But in any case, the center out there is a point, is experienced as a point. All the pilgrimages that human beings go on are actually acting out, ritually acting out the journey to the center with a capital C. So this is in ancient religions an archetypal projection of that center out there. Now, in that center out there is a lot of there's a lot of imagery in world spiritual traditions about the journey to the center and then the ascent to the center, with the implications that when you go to the center, there is a hierarchy of spiritual development, a hierarchy of development in which one begins to connect to the center, to connect to the energy that comes in through the center. You say that the energy comes in on this vertical axis, but if you've not really connected with the center, then you live at the lowest level of human organization. We'll be seeing how this relates to the individuation process in a bit. But let's look at it this way. Now, this is from the book, The Archetypal Initiation. So at the lowest levels of development, there's a great deal of chaos experienced. And there is no sense of orientation to a center. One is living in a kind of a wasteland. At some point, however, there's an experience of an epiphany. That is, there appears, we see it in the mythical traditions, there appears a star in the sky that tells the magi, the ones who know, that there is a direction to go in to pursue connection with that center and the one who represents that center. And so when that epiphany occurs, then the effort is made to move toward that center and to begin to get energy from the connection to the center. In this location here, this is when we'll be talking later on. This is when you connect in some way with a manifestation of the sacred, or, as Jung would say, a connection with something that you experience as numinous in your life. When you make that connection, there's an energy flow that starts, and that begins to issue in a flow of creativity. Jung believed that when you begin to connect with the archetypal energies of the psyche, that there will be a flood of energy coming in, and you've all heard the term inflation. If you've been studying Jung, inflation is when you get a flood of this archetypal energy, and it begins to fill you up with energy, and then if you get really too inflated with energy, you have got to really be developing some capacity for containment of that energy. And when you are capable of having a containment of that energy, then it is it's more possible for you to be able to form relationships in for both family, intimate relationships, and community. And then finally, as you mature into a more generative place, you get to the point where you can really be committed, really fascinated with, interested in, and committed to generativity in relationship to the world beyond the I. So that is a traditional image of the developmental process. Jung was always fascinated by the idea that in the psyche, the archetypal self was a crystalline structure. He had a sense and an intuition that within the psyche there's a diamond, what you may have heard talked about as the diamond body. And if you look at his collected works, volume 9-2, you will see Jung's reflections about some ancient images of what he believed contained some suggestions, intimations, insights into the structure of the self. And so the title of this essay in volume 9 is The Structure and Dynamics of the Self. So now, the reason I'm sharing this with you tonight is because Jung was very fascinated with especially earlier in his work, with the idea that you can study the collective unconscious. This is another thing that differentiates Jung from most contemporary psychologists and psychological theories. The idea that there is a collective unconscious in the codes of the psyche. In any case, Carl Jung was fascinated. He realized from his studies, comparative studies of world mythology, and I recommend that you look at the index to volume 20 of the collected works to see the enormity of the studies that he did on. If you look at this quadration here, there's a square at the center here. There's a four-sidedness. There's four sides to this image. This is an octahedron, and so what we need to remember that Jung was convinced that in psychic geography there was a four-square aspect to psychic geography, and he began his studies being fascinated by what he called the quaternio and the double quaternio, which is the eightfold image, the fourfold and the eightfold. And I'm sure that what fascinated him so much about this is because is that this image contains both a geometrical representation of the fourfoldness. There are four sides to an octahedron. If you just turn it in your hand, get a calcium fluoride crystal, hold it, turn it in your hands. It's like two pyramids base to base. But there are only four faces on an octahedron. Four faces that extend from top to bottom. So there is an eightfold, the double quaternio, and there's the fourfoldness of the four sides, the four faces of an octahedron. And in that image, that single image, Jung was intuiting something about this archetypal code of the structure and dynamics of the self. Now, if you look at this section in volume 9, and read this, Jung was trying to assign terms for the facets. What he was interested in. Okay, if this is an image of the structure of the self, what are the facets? What are the sides? What do they represent? And what he was trying to do was to look in, as Jung taught us to do, to look into mythic traditions to see what they might have to tell us about the deep structures of the self. And so this was from a particular tradition, some of the Gnostic traditions, and he was trying to associate. He would take these terms, Moses' carnal man, the lower Jethro, the negative Miriam, and so forth, and he was trying to assign the the sort of mythic images of different personalities and different qualities to the octahedron to try to get a sense of what they might mean by looking at the mythic context. Now, after a while, Jung lost interest in this. He never gave up the idea that there was a kind of a crystalline code within the self, that there's a certain structure in the collective unconscious. So, as you know, when he tired of this, he began to get more and more interested in the fourfoldness of the psyche, and began to focus on the psychological typology, intuition, thinking, sensation, and feeling. And he began to work a great deal with psychological typology as the fourfoldness of the psyche, trying to look at the fourfoldness in typology that he came up with as a way of thinking about what is the quadration of the psyche about. Now, his protege and lover, Tony Wolff, had another idea about what the fourfold quadration of the psyche is. And she published this article in the Students' Association publication of the Jung Institute called The Structural Forms of the Feminine Psyche. And she began to say, and this anticipated some of my later work, I realized that Tony Wolff is one of my forerunners in Jungian psychology, and I trace my heritage back to her, in a sense, in that she began to look at there being structural forms other than typology, other than psychological typology. And she was focusing on the female psyche, saying that there is an underlying structure in the female psyche. Now, what we'll see in a bit, what I think this has to do with the structure of the archetypal self and the way in which the archetypal self manifests itself in our personalities, in our development. But in any case, she believed that there was a structural form of the mother. Later on, I will talk about that as the queen archetype in the psyche. This is the woman who has this energies of nurturing, and that organizes a great deal of her personality. There is the Amazon woman. This woman is extremely comfortable with her aggression, her capacity to focus, be disciplined, be goal-oriented, and lives her life that way. And she said there's another structural form of the feminine psyche called the hetera. This later, I call this the female warrior. I call this the female lover. The hetera is the person who relates to you erotically and can make you feel as if you are the only person in the world. Then there's the medial woman, which I later came to identify as the female magician. She says that two of these, and this will be important later when we get to the diagrams which I have here, in which we actually see the way I think that the dynamics which she was observing can be understood. But in any case, she says the medial woman And the wise woman and the Amazon woman are impersonally related. That is to say, they are invested in transpersonal involvements. They're invested in things that are not personal. If you're going to be connected with them, it will be because of the interest in knowledge and the interest in achieving a mission. So we'll come back and we'll see how this plays out in my understanding of the structure of the self. There's another image of it as she was identifying the mother with archetypal images of the feminine in myth, Demeter, and Aphrodite, as you can see. These are all in your handouts. But in any case, she was convinced that there was this fourfold structure in the feminine. Edward Whitmont sought to apply a similar model to the male psyche, in which he had the hero as the what I would call the warrior figure, although the hero is really a very immature warrior. He had the wise man as the magician figure. He had the nurturing father, the father who carries the ordering principle, and also the one who is looking for the ordering of the cosmos. And then he was thinking in terms of father-son relationships, which I can assure you the male lover, this would be what I would call the male lover. The male lover is interested in a lot more than being a son. So in any case, her tradition and Whitmont's tradition there never was associated very much with anyone to the archetypal self. The way that classical Jungians have typically looked at the self is really expressed extremely eloquently and profoundly by the great Edward Edinger. Edward Edinger's, if you haven't seen this diagram, this is a diagram on his understanding of the way in which the ego relates to the archetypal self. The archetypal self is the center of power and energy, and as an individual relates to the connection to the self, we said that the self will press a great deal of energy into the ego, and there will be a tendency for the ego to identify with the self. This will create inflation, and then there will be so much inflation in the personality that there will be what he would call an active inflation. Then one has a crisis in which one's inflated view gets hammered by reality, and one feels alienated and begins to feel fragmented. And as the process goes on, the individual falls into depletion and depression. And according to Edinger, usually the individual, if the individual can attain a place of humility before the great energies of the psyche, that there can be a kind of a conversion experience, a kind of a reattachment to a sense of humility before the power of the center within. And then the individual begins to reconnect, feel reconnection again, and then, according to Edinger, there's a tendency to move right back into a kind of cycle of merger again and inflation. I think you would agree with me. This looks a bit like a mapping of bipolar disorders. But in any case, Edinger had this fantastic understanding, as did Jung, the source of this, about the power of the archetypal self and the way in which the I gets its energy from the great self within, I like to call it. But there is a tremendous problem that today we would talk about as the problem of regulating one's relationship to archetypal energies. So Jung saw that very clearly and spent so much of his career helping people to try to find ways to relate consciously to the archetypal energies. Edinger, in my view, is the one who expressed Jung's ideas, the classical ideas of Jung, most clearly on the important, the powerful role of the archetypal self in personality. Here's another image of his sense of the development of the archetypal self. And again, this is a classical Jungian view. That is to say, the person begins life in childhood, and there's a lack of differentiation between the I and the great it, the great self, the great archetypal self. So as development continues, there's a gradual differentiation as the individual differentiates from the archetypal self, from the codes of the archetypal self, and from the energy of the archetypal self, and begins to be, we might say, less inflated. And the goal for psychic maturation in Edinger, in Jung and Edinger, is the gradual getting much more into a conscious relationship between the I and the great self within. And so this is an image of a really workable establishment of a conscious connection between the I and the great self. And of course, this right here is an image of a very, very conscious, a psychologically astute, very conscious person. Now, in my work, yes.
I'm not sure.
Yes.
I haven't read the book before.
Okay.
So I'm not really totally clear. You were saying that the goal is to get to what's symbolized by figure 4, right?
Well, this is Edinger's view, and it's a view that's shared by a lot of folks who are classical Jungians. And the idea is to differentiate from the... See, if you don't know there's such a thing as an archetypal self, you will tend to have ways in which you are unconsciously identified with it. So in other words, and this is one of the important things about Jung's psychology, because if Jung is correct, as I'm convinced that he is, that there is an incredibly powerful agent in the psyche that contains codes for the individuation process, and yet is loaded with extremely high voltage energy, then if you don't know that there is this great thing, I like to call it the God self, because Jung talked about the archetypal self as the God imago. You can say it's some would say it's the image, the imago Dei, but I don't like putting it that way, because that implies that it's just an image in the psyche and it's not a living presence in the psyche. And so what I would say that if there's a living presence in your psyche and it has tremendous knowledge of the ground plan for your optimal development, and yet it has enormous energies, that if you cannot relate to them consciously, you will either spend too much of your life without a conscious connection to those energies, or you may be connecting with those energies in an unconscious way, and those energies do not manifest positively in your psyche. So this is why it's, in my personal view, it's so important that people understand this Jung's idea of the archetypal self, this organizing center in the psyche, but also this enormous generator of energy in the psyche, generator of extremely powerful energies in the psyche. If you don't know about that, and you're either just projecting that center on other people, or you're identifying with it and you're a narcissistic personality disorder, this has got a lot of implications. So one of the things that I think it's important for us to think about this evening is that if you do not know about this psychological entity in the psyche, you are very vulnerable to having it manifest in ways which you have no idea, what is happening. And if you're not conscious of it and conscious of the need to relate to it consciously, which is what I'm saying, the capacity to relate to that great thing within you consciously, then you are at a great disadvantage in life. So getting to that figure 4, it's easier to talk about getting to that point than it is to actually have a living relationship to the archetypal self. I think, however, that Jung was clear about this, and Ettinger was amazingly clear about the central role of getting to get some understanding in your life about how you are in fact related to the energies of the archetypal self, and what connecting with that energy probably is doing to you in your life. So let me just proceed here. Now, in my work, and I don't have time tonight to go into the history of how I came to these ideas about the structure of the psyche, but let me just go to what I'm presenting to you tonight. It is pressing on to an idea about the actual structure of the way the archetypal self lays itself out in the personality. And here is the model that I believe corresponds to the evidence that we have, both from comparative mythology and from other comparative psychologies. I've spent a long time talking about this, but what we're looking at here, I want to just suggest to you this is what I consider to be the great code in the dynamics of the personality, and I want to just run through this right quickly. The psyche is indeed, Jung assumed the psyche was quadrated. He didn't take Tony Wolf's direction, which turns out that I have been following the line of development that she was trying to get started. By the way, after she differed with Jung, their relationship soured. Fancy that. But anyway, what I want you to imagine here is that these images here, you're looking down at a Mayan pyramid, the top of a Mayan pyramid. If you know the Mayan pyramid, like the one at Chichen Itza, I'm convinced that the Mayan pyramid is particularly that Chichen Itza pyramid is an amazing projection of the code of the archetypal self. I say Jung assumed that a mythic image is the face that an instinctual pattern turns to the world. So when he studied mythology, and I've tried to walk in his footsteps on this, when he studied mythology, he wasn't simply, of course he was interested in old philosophies and so forth, but he wasn't just an antiquarian in his interest. He was interested in trying to figure out what these mythic patterns had to do with the dynamics of the psyche. And so I agree with Jung that there is a quadration in the psyche, and there is a certain task that I believe that you have in your development that is grounded in this code, and that has to do with becoming a foursquare person. In the ancient world, they used to talk that the person who has attained their moral and spiritual development has become a foursquare person. And so in my work, I believe that indeed there is a fourfoldness to the human personality. This is what is common to males and females, in my view. There are, people have accused me of saying that there's only 4 archetypes. I've never said that, never believed it. But I do want to point out that we might say not all archetypal systems are equal. Some of them are the building blocks of the personal psyche, the personality of the person. Others are serving other kinds of functions in intuition and creativity. In any case, I believe that in the psyche, based on my research, there are indeed 4 powers, which I characterize as the royal powers, and we'll see another slide here in a minute. There is the royal. I got to get used to this pointer. The royal powers, the lover powers, the magician powers, and the warrior powers. So there are 4 powers, and we will see in just a moment. And if you were to take that female Mayan pyramid and the male Mayan pyramid, place them base to base, and have the king and queen on the same facet of the octahedron, if you place those Mayan pyramids that way, what you will notice is there's symmetry on this, and the only difference is that if you look at the way this presents, there is an asymmetry on this axis here. And let me go to the next slide so I can talk more about these energies. In my view, the masculine code, represented here, is often the developmental lines for the development of the male self. And Jung believed that the contrasexual was in all of us, that it was a powerful presence intrapsychically, deeper in the unconscious than the dominant aspect of the personality. And I think this diagram, if you study that, that that certainly keeps that that understanding of Jung. Let me go to the next slide. This is what I believe to be coded into the developmental programs in the psyche. We can call these 4 developmental lines, and I think this is coded in your DNA. That there's a developmental line for power and the assertion of power. When that is very immature, it is simply the capacity to dominate. And we got a lot of folks who have a very immature connection to that royal energy. But the capacity is just merely dominating energy. But when it begins to mature, it begins to be capable of creative ordering and an interest in provision, providing of what is needed. That's the nurturance. And when a personality begins to be connected in a very good enough way with this royal system, they begin to experience a great deal of centeredness and calmness. One of the things, one of the ways that I will work with people is trying to understand how this kind of coding is manifesting in their personality, what is working in their personality and what is not. So in any case, at high levels of development, there develops a capacity for inclusive caring. It's not just about my family. It's not just about my ego interest. And at the very high levels of development, it's someone who can who can really see other people's potential, who's dealt with their primitive narcissism to the point that they can be tremendously centered on the potential of other people. And this is what young people need today, and they're not getting that much of. So this is, if you want to talk about what is needed to be a mentor and a generative father, it's a lot of mature development of this, a generative mother or a generative father, the one who is beyond being lost in their own narcissism. That is the developmental line. There's a developmental line for the erotic life of the individual, the embodied and erotic life. This is what I call the developmental task of the lover systems. At the very, and then you can see here, the way I've got this modeled, the lower levels of development are at the base of the pyramid, and the assumption being as you get into more of a creative organization, and the creative organization and integration of your. By the way, it's I've been working a lot on integrative psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, and as you work on the integration of your personality, which is what I believe individuation is really about. It's about high levels of coherence and integration in an individual's personality. It's not simply where willy-nilly fate takes you. That I believe that the individuation process is really an image, it's really a way of talking about the journey toward optimal integration. That's what I'm going to be talking about a lot more tomorrow. But in any case, so there's a developmental line here. At the base, it's just polymorphous. It's like Freud said, polymorphous perversity. It's like you can have an erotic connection with anything, feces, your own feces. This is the most wonderful thing that I've ever seen. Children experience this a lot, if their parents don't catch them fast enough. But anyway, as the individual begins to develop and find more connection, establish more connection to a nurturing other, then they begin to really experience their bodies as coherent. There's a lot in the developmental literature about children is all the work that a child has to do to get to where they feel that they have integrity in their body, between their selfhood and their body. So as it develops further, you actually begin to be able to experience your erotic life in a much more genital way, as Freud would put it. As you develop, you get the capacity to really be, in a sense, embodied in your own erotic life. If you continue developing on this line, you get much more of a capacity for real psychological intimacy, and gradually the capacity to really relate to larger communities, to relate, be connected. This is a lot of talk today about connection. Well, this is the line of development, and of course, we always hear about joy. This is the developmental line that has to do with your joy. So, you got to ask yourself, have you had some experiences of joy recently? If you have, I congratulate you, because the capacity to get this lover side of your personality, your erotic life, developed to the point where you can really experience joy, that's quite an attainment. Then there's this is the developmental line for embodiment and affiliation. Then there's a cognitive developmental line. Different psychologies, different researchers have focused on different parts of these quadrants. The development in the cognitive line. At the lowest level, it's mere knowledge. You study just for facts, and it's mere knowing of objects. If this thing is functioning better, though, you actually are capable of experiencing what we can talk about as the archetype of death and rebirth, the archetype of initiation. That is to say, you've got to get to the point where you can actually die to the old world and experience a new one. And as this develops more, you get to the point where you can contemplate your life and gain a lot more insight into it. This is what we hope will happen in psychotherapy and in analysis, that you get to the point where you can actually contemplate, be someone who is conscious about your life and can begin to incorporate that understanding into the way you live your life. And then, of course, at higher levels, there is a capacity in this line of development for wisdom, for developing wisdom. And the highest line, I would associate this with all the interest in the shaman today. The shaman is a very high-level form. The true shaman is really a high-level form of the capacity on this magician line, the capacity to be a healer, using knowledge for healing self and others. The fourth developmental line is the developmental line that I call the line of development for the warrior. It begins with just mere aggression. We're seeing more of the discharge of primitive aspects of the psyche in this quadrant these days. In my city of Chicago, we've seen a lot of acting out of raw aggression, and so it is not easy to get beyond the primitive expression of aggression. It takes a lot of parenting, a lot of nurture, a lot of mentoring, and so on to make that happen. As that capacity grows, you get the capacity for boundary formation in relationships. This is why it's next to impossible to have success in intimate relationships if you do not have some development on this other pole of your personality, to be able to form boundaries, and then to be able to know what is I and what is you. codependency is a case in mind, is a problem. People that do not have adequate boundary formation. So in this developmental line is that capacity for focus and discipline to be oriented toward a mission. It is the capacity to use your aggression in creative and responsible ways for the protection of others. And at the highest level, this is the chivalry ideal of service, and of service to those, care for those, and protection of those who do not have an advocate. So those are the 4 developmental lines. Notice here, I have put on here what I think the research evidence shows about the asymmetry in the male and female developmental process, if we're talking statistically. That is to say, it is a very, very incontroverted fact that young males are flooded with aggression early in life. It's some people call it testosterone poisoning. But in any case, the research shows that if you're going to be killed by another person, the odds are extremely high, and this is worldwide, the odds are extremely high that it will be by a young male. And that is one of the findings of scientific sociology that has never been controverted by any data. So in any case, in adolescence, young males are flooded with aggression, and in young adulthood, hopefully they begin to get some insight and to be able to realize that just acting out aggression is going to be counterproductive. And then at midlife, males discover the lover archetype. That is late for males, but it's at the source. It's behind a lot of the dysfunction that comes with males at midlife and following. We can talk about that some more later. Young females have a great deal of affiliative energies, and they're much more into affiliative energies. It's not just there's difference in the way in which young women experience affiliation and so forth. There's more and more brain studies that talk about the difference in the male and female brains and their differing capacities to relate to emotional issues, emotional topics, and so on. But I don't know whether you've noticed it or not, but at midlife, women really get themselves together, and they may have been somewhat passive in other periods of their lives, but at midlife, Gloria Steinem said, "Don't send me a woman to work with me in the women's movement under 35." And so about the time that men develop their capacity to really want to spend more time in intimacy with the wife, she's now working on her second master's degree, or she's building her own business, and she is really getting so focused and disciplined on her mission. And I don't know if you've noticed any of that, but so here's where the asymmetry between males and females are. Notice that if you look at this model, the developmental task is to bring these 4 powers into balance. That is the task of the individuation process to bring these four powers into creative tension with each other, and thereby to enable a person to achieve much more of an experience of wholeness in their lives. So we are alike in the powers that all of us have to work with and to learn how to integrate. There is this asymmetry that complicates matters. I put this life cycle thing in there not because that you can assume when somebody walks into your office. If you cannot assume that every person has developed in this traditional way. So when you're working with individuals, the question is, how have they developed in each one of these quadrants in terms of their capacity to move forward on each of these developmental lines? I think that in my work, I think that you've got to develop in the individuation process. You've got to develop the capacity to have creative tension on this axis, and you've got to have creative tension on this axis. And unlike some people's ideas about find your myth and live your myth, I think that's a recipe for living a one-sided life. I think the goal is to try to understand how one is relating to each of these developmental lines. And so, in my life, I developed along the line of the females, because when I was born, I was supposed to have been Roberta, and so I was actually raised in such a way that I did not have any warrior as a young male or adolescent, because I was not supposed to be the aggressive one. So depending on your family dynamics, it's very interesting. These are archetypal, these are potentials, self-potentials, grounded in the codes of the archetypal self, in my view. But your culture and your family determine how much affirmation and blessing of each of these potentials. Just read these as archetypal potentials. 4 systems of archetypal potentials coded in the archetypal self. And this, in my view, is a major expression of the psychological foundations of what Jungians call the transcendent function. That is to say, the transcendent function is actually a manifestation of the working of the archetypal self in the personality, and so any imbalance in the power of the development of these quadrants in your life, there will be something in your psyche that's going to try to get you to pay attention to the ones you have not developed. And then you can imagine here what I would say then about why you would want to look at your dreams. It's not just sort of a random thing, because your dreams will actually give you a lot of clues about what, we talk about shadow figures appearing in dreams, but we can look at dreams much more specifically about what archetypal potential the individual that is trying to come home to the individual's personality. So let me go to this next slide. So we've already talked about these potentials, the positive aspects, the potentials in the psyche, and these are the expressions of the virtues. By the way, I realized later on, talking to some of my friends who are classics professors, that this coding actually was something that had been picked up by ancient philosophers in terms of the cardinal virtues. The virtue of courage is the virtue. Sorry about that. The courage of virtue is the virtue of courage. Sorry, is a warrior virtue. The virtue of prudence, meaning you think about the consequences of different lines of action before you engage in it. Prudence, that is a magician virtue. Temperance is a lover virtue, and you got to forget the 19th century version of what temperance is. In the ancient world, temperance meant that you accessed a particular vitality in your life, but you accessed it in ways that did not destroy you. And justice is a royal virtue. That is to say, it is a virtue having to do with the way you manifest your power. So, in my view, each one of these 4 developmental lines are coded. Freud believed that there was a developmental line. Freud worked this axis here. Adler worked this axis here. So I'm convinced, Jung thought that the difference between Freud and Adler was merely a typological difference. That may have been so, but in fact, they were actually studying different axes in the actual developmental ground plan of the psyche. So Freud worked on the relationship between eros and aggression, and Adler worked on power and the need to criticize expressions of power in the light of social interest, moral qualities. This would be the line of the prophetic tradition, for those of you that are aware of the prophetic tradition and the different Abrahamic traditions that is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The capacity to criticize power. If you, and also I wanted to just note for those of you who study comparative psychology, Heinz Kohut worked on this axis here because he was most interested in the developmental line of narcissism. So, in other words, I believe these codes in the these codes for the development of individuation are actually codes having to do with the unfolding of higher and higher levels of optimal personality integration. We talk a lot today about developing more cohesiveness in personality. We're indebted to, I personally am indebted to Heinz Kohut for a lot of his insights into the way in which the development of the self, the nuclear self, is different from the development of the ego. In any case, what I'm trying to plot here is show you how you plot utilizing this model in terms of levels of creative organization. So the way that this diagram, you should read this diagram, is that the lighter and larger circles indicate lower levels of integration of the energies. So at the lowest level are the psychotic manifestations, where the individual has very little capacity for containing the the great energies of the psyche. The next level up would correspond to what we consider borderline levels of personality, and similar levels of moderate disintegrative tendencies in the personality. As you ascend in levels of creative integration, in my view, you move. If you move over this threshold, this right here is a fulcrum point. We've known for a long time that there's a certain point in the organizational development in the personality in which a person reaches a significant threshold of organization in the personality, and the borderline can stop being as loosely organized and move into a area of a personality disorder. These are the areas of a personality disorder. So in any case, as one develops, one can move out of the low level of organization in any of these sectors. Everybody doesn't develop in the same order. Some people develop best first in their magician system. You can think about yourself. Some people develop their capacity to attach and really commit in relationships. And some people develop on their capacity for working and being goal-oriented. Other people develop, you may laugh when I say it, but when you get to this point right here, which would be someone, if they did not have any of these others filled in, the smaller and darker indicates higher levels of organization. And we will tomorrow I'll show you some different the ways this thing can organize. But in any case, if you get to the point where you've got all of these energies working in a good enough way, you're getting to be a high performance personality. And if you get to the point where you can begin to be relating consciously to the archetypal self and developing a conscious ongoing relationship, I believe that you can get to really optimal levels of personality organization. So I don't think optimal personality organization, I don't think optimal personality is simply a pipe dream. I believe that everybody in this room has coded within them a template for higher levels of development. And depending upon how much nurture and how much work they put into their personalities, they can move toward a much higher degree of integration. So let me see this. In my work, I've been working with trying to understand how different personalities look depending on how they have come into their developmental process, which of these sectors they developed first, and which ones have been neglected. So if you look at this, I have done a lot of examining of how to think about the difficulties of personalities by looking at how they have come into their level of development so far. And so let me just point out here.
What's the difference between 15 and 16?
Okay. 15 is this is a high performance personality. This would be the person that's extremely creative. It's a person who is able to relate to other people fairly well. It is a person who knows what they want to do. That is to say, they're clear about their goals. They are effective in their capacity to implement their goals. They're able to use their cognitive powers to facilitate that process. Their cognitive powers don't push them into detachment. Instead, their cognitive powers enable them to go forward. And so they're a very high-performance individual. The only thing about it is, in one way of thinking about them, see, they have still not made any kind of conscious connection to something greater than themselves, which is what Jungians mean by forming an ego archetypal self-axis. You've got to get a sense that there's something greater operating in your psyche and in your life than your I. So these high-performance people can be extremely successful. They can win a Nobel Prize. They can get Oscars. They can be extremely successful in companies and so on. Thank you. But they always feel the lack. What the great French Freudian Jacques Lacan called the lack. You know, human beings, if they do not have a conscious connection to that greater reality in their personality, the archetypal self, a conscious connection about it being a presence that can never be I, but has to be a thou. I want to honor David Robinson, one of your local persons here who's written a brilliant book, From Id to Thou, about Jung's psychology and moral vision. And so in any case, but these high-performance personalities are persons who do not have a conscious connection to the archetypal self, though they are drawing on its powers in a very, very effective way in many ways. But it's like that old song, they can't get no satisfaction. That is to say, they always have a feeling that the real thing is eluding them. And it's my sense that when one has built a relationship with the archetypal self through learning how to practice the presence of the archetypal self in one's life, then the capacity to live what we Jungians call a synchronistic life emerges. And an individual living, I'm going to be talking about ecstasy tomorrow and the way in which the experiences of optimal personality functioning are related to this. Because it's one, there's a lot of confusion about ecstasy, what it is, and about the possibility of attaining it. Actually, the capacity to live in a communion with the great center beyond the I is an enormous attainment in life. And it offers the best chance to live in an optimally coherent place in your life. So this is all about the higher levels of analytical work in terms of working on really, really developing a capacity to live the connection between the I and the archetypal self. Now, let me really confuse matters here. Because in my work, unlike in Jung's work, in classical Jungians, I believe that we actually need three different terms to talk about the different structural aspects of personality. The archetypal self is a living presence in the psyche always present, always with you, has always been with you, lives within you in a powerful way all the time, whether you know it or not. The archetypal self contains all the codes for your optimal development. It has more energy than you could ever dream about what to do with. And all of the energy you're able to connect with and to put into and to express in your life is coming from it. Your eye there are no independent energy sources in your eye. So in other words, one of the most important things to understand is that the great generator of energy in your psyche, whether you know about it or not, is the archetypal self. And so if you've been having enough energy to face your life these days, it's because the archetypal self lives in you and you have got a connection to it, perhaps without knowing about this connection. But its energy is the energy that flows in you. It's also the codes that will be prompting you through your dreams and through things that happen in your relationships and things that happen in synchronicity. You Jungians know about synchronicity. The synchronicity is a manifestation of the transcendent function. And there will be manifestations of the activation of the presence of the self in your life. And that's where we have the synchronicity. But so the archetypal self is always present. It's always active. And the real question is, does the I know about it? And has the I been equipped with any ways to develop and nurture a conscious relationship with that great self? Now, in my work, I'm with Jung on the archetypal self, on the role of that. However, there's a different kind of organization in the psyche that's not an ego. It's not an ego organization. What we're looking at here is the various movements toward the development of a system self, what I call a system self, little s self, system self. This would be the organization in your personality conceived of as a complex adaptive system. So in other words, the codes for creative organization are in the self, and it will be trying to assist you in balancing and balancing the opposites in your personality and coming into creative balance and in your individuation process. In other words, there's something in you that's impatient with where you are now. And you can say, well, that's good news or it's bad news. It's good news if you had thought that there's nothing in you that's trying to take you to a much more radiant place. Because there is, and it is. The only way it can be bad news is if you turn a deaf ear to the promptings of the great self. And if you turn a deaf ear to it, that doesn't mean it's not still active. And often it will begin to manifest in ways that are not entirely, shall we say, helpful. And in any case, for example, if a person has attempted to be extremely nice all their life and had the assertiveness crushed out of them early in life, there can come to be a point where the agenda in the personality for aggression will come blasting through the defenses. And that's what happens when people go postal. And they suddenly go buy a gun and go. The perfectly nice person, and they go and begin shooting up the company or the workplace. So in any case, one should not get the idea that there are no consequences from not paying attention to the agendas of the archetypal self and the personality, because there are. But when I say one is trying to build a system self, you see, you have in the archetypal self is presenting to you, it has the codes for these developments, but they're like architectural plans. And in the process of personality development, one actually has to get to the point where one can access the energies of each of these archetypal systems and bring them into a balance. Because if they do not, the personality does not yet really have what could be called a self, a little s self. It does not yet have a self system. So from the lower levels of development of the personality up through that fulcrum point we were talking about a while ago, that the person has not really developed a dependable structure to their system self. I'm indebted to the work of Heinz Kohut for the breakthrough in helping us understand that the ego is different from the nuclear self. There are some Jungians that have wanted to make Kohut's nuclear self somehow the same thing as the archetypal self. It is not. It is not. Because one has to actually develop into having a structure, a dependable structure in one's personality. Okay. So anyway, you saw the corresponding things that I believe are coded in the archetypal self for males and females, and an archetypal intrusion. In my view, they always taught Jungians that at the core of every complex is an archetype, but they never really taught us very much about how to look for what the archetype was. I think that it's instructive to look at these different energies and ask what is at the core of your complexes, which are these archetypal systems. I don't have time to go more into this tonight, but there's a way in which the research evidence on psychopathology can be layered on this decoding, and there's a number of different ways that one can integrate different aspects to the different theories and plot them on here, and I don't have time tonight to go into that. Let me just let me go back. Now let me just open it up. Now we've got about 20 minutes for maybe a little bit more for question and answer and dialogue about this, and anything I've said. So again, the archetypal self is leading you in this development toward a developed and integrated, individuated system self. But one has to have those potentials nurtured, and the ego. The goal is to get your ego to the point that it can be aware of its own structure and to be able to cooperate with the archetypal self in filling in those gaps. So let me just open the floor, and if you'll ask a question, I will try to respond as best I can. Just.
Structural self dynamic or static?
the structural self, the psyche's always dynamic. It's always dynamic. The thing that one needs to realize is that in lower levels of organization, it's often too dynamic. That is to say, psychoanalysis talks now a lot about the structuralization of the self, the little s self, and that's not Jungian. But I affirm that. There's a lot of talk about attachment theory and about emotional regulation. That is the challenge of getting to the point where the dynamic energies in what I would say the archetypal energies in your psyche that are present do not push you into a fragmentation. So the psyche is very dynamic always. But the maturing personality, the individuating personality, develops an internal structure. I like to call it a temple within. It develops the capacity to contain these energies and channel them creatively. So that's a good question. Yes, right here.
Could you go back to page 14, the male
Yes. Okay.
You're not implying,
Speak up louder, please.
you're not implying that every male or every female goes through each of those steps.
Not in that direct. Yes, absolutely not. No, I'm just saying that there's cross-cultural research evidence to suggest that there's a kind of an evolved thing in evolutionary psychology which presses some kind of a tendency on that. If you read Anthony Stevens' work, you get another point of view on that sort of thing. But I'm not as idealizing of evolutionary theories as Stevens, and so. But I do believe that there's evidence that if you look at simply statistical probabilities, that there is a press, and that's our job in culture and spirituality to actually provide the developmental guidance to help people resist any kind of biological pressures to develop in a certain way. And so when you're working with any individual, I always say, don't think about that statistical thing. I just put that in there for therapists so that they can be alert to possible life cycle issues for their patients, because there may be an involvement of a life cycle issue. But there are many men who, like me, had the development experience of the female. I've gotten a lot more assertive in my latter years, and there are women who were socialized as daddy's son, right? And so with any individual, what you want to do is to just ask the question: which of these archetypal potentials, which are coded in the archetypal self, have actually been deployed in the individual personality? And so if you were evaluating your personality, what you do is to just try to study these energies and see which ones you're really comfortable with and which ones you have not been able to work with as well. And then that would give you some clue about your developmental agenda for individuation. So, others, yes.
I'm curious about the energy aspect of the archetypal self.
Yes.
And so, if you experience a void of energy,
Right.
chronic fatigue,
Yeah.
low energy,
Yes.
what do you think are the underpinnings of
Well, Jung was always very aware that while the archetypal self is present and active in each person, some people seem to be constitutionally more connected to energy flows. And so if you look at the research on levels of activation in different personalities, my guess is that different individuals are nurtured in such ways that they have not really been able to feel a connection to that generator within. In other words, if a parent was not very mirroring of you, if no one ever really kind of looked at you with a gleam in their eye and saw the gold in your personality or the diamond in your personality, you may have not been aided in having a sense that you're connected to anything great in there. And so that's a developmental issue. And yet what we need to remember is that even if an individual was not mirrored in childhood, that does not mean that the archetypal self is not present. And that generator of energy is not present, because it is present. And it's not necessary for an individual to go through their life low energy forever. But if you read my Facing the Dragon book, where I talk about these things as dragon energies, there's this tremendous amount of energy in every personality, but many of them have never really, because of developmental experiences, been able to feel connected to that energy. And so in the course of psychotherapy and analysis, one hopes that the therapist or the analyst can be a way of helping to connect that person to that energy, so that the energy will then be experienced in the psyche, and that can take a while. But other questions and comments? We've got about at least 10 or 15 minutes. Yes.
Actually, my question goes back to Someone's question.
Yes.
I'm wondering how you account for personality types. How you account for personality types through your 4 stages. Intuitively, I think that the lover goes with Kirsten's temperaments.
Well, it's very interesting. The question of how this archetypal template relates to Myers-Briggs typologies. Now, in my view, the Myers-Briggs approach to typology is extremely useful. I do not think it corresponds to these archetypal patterns. The best attempt that's been made to relate my theory to typology was in John Giannini's recent book on typology called The Compass of the Soul. And he has a section in there in which he attempts to make this idea about the structure of the psyche work with the Myers-Briggs typology. My take on Myers-Briggs typology is it's very useful, and there's a lot of ways in which it can help an individual to work with psychological typology. But unlike classical Jungians, I don't think that's really based on accurate assumptions about the archetypal foundations of the psyche. So yes, ma'am.
Could you speak a little bit more about both the positive and the negative archetypes, and could you give examples of each, or a few? And because you said how many were there? 8, did you say?
No, I said that there are 4 powers, and in my writing and in my lectures, I've done a great deal of discussion of the archetypes themselves are not negative. But the way in which one relates to them can be extremely negative. And so if one is unconscious in the way in which one is relating to one's warrior archetype, one will be flooded with a lot of aggression, and it will act it out in their relationships and in their life. So we spoke about the positive things that kind of self-potential can do. But when you see people acting very unconsciously, what you're seeing is a flooding of one of those archetypal energies that's actually driving the individual compulsively. And so I've done a lot of work in trying to talk about how compulsive symptoms, compulsive behavioral patterns, compulsive relationship patterns are not just personal things about the person. They reflect certain ways the individual is relating to these archetypal forces in the psyche. So the archetypes themselves are not ever negative, but they certainly do come out in raw and unintegrated, unregulated ways. And so a person who is flooded with the magician energies will be all in their head, and if it moves, they'll interpret it or tell you their theory about it. But they won't be very good at relating to you. They will want to always make you into a student. If somebody's flooded with a lover archetype, they may manifest as being extremely dependent personalities. If you look at those diagrams in there about the way these archetypal patterns correlate to different personality disorders, where I compare Theodore Milan's work and mine, or they may become an addict. Because, if you're dominated but flooded with lover energies, you will always experience the center of your personality outside. You will be out in the social world some way. It can be a bottle. It can be a bottle of alcohol. It can be some drugs. But whatever, wherever you make the bogus center, will be a flooding, compulsive thing, usually out of the lover, the side of the personality. A compulsive expression of the royal energy, all those positive things that you can do when you're mature in that energy, are positive, is possible in every person. But say a person who's a narcissistic personality disorder is being flooded with that royal energy, and they think they are the king, and all of us are the subjects. And so identification with an archetype and acting it out or projecting it on someone else is the way they manifest. So, the import of my work has been to try to help people be aware of how they relate to these different archetypal systems that are in the plan, the plan of development for the system self. And these codes for coherent integration, I believe, reside in the archetypal self. So, yes, back here.
How do the four psychological types relate to the different manifestations of these archetypes?
You mean
How does it relate to the manifestation of these four archetypes?
You mean the Myers-Briggs typology?
No, Jung's four psychological types. How does that relate? The thinking, feeling.
That's what I mean. That's related to the psychological typology. You can obviously see that he spent a lot of time working with thinking and intuition are, in my view, magician functions. And the sensation is a lover function, and some aspects of the feeling type are lover function. But Jung does not really do anything in his systematic work with what I would call the royal archetype. If you look in the collected works, he was aware of the king figure, but he never developed an elaborated theory of the role of what that imaged in the personality. So there's no one-to-one. Jung Freud was the one that acted out the king and the warrior archetype a lot. He built a movement. Jung didn't want to build a movement, and Freud was always scathingly aggressive and attacking toward anybody that differed with him. So he was much more aggressive in defending his realm than Jung was. So Jung did not put a lot of energy into thinking about the royal systems at all. So, yes, over here.
I thought Jung did address the king and the queen in the Mysterium.
Yes, he did address that as part of the conjunctio, the conjunctio oppositorum. But he never went into it as any elaborate way of being related to a developmental line for narcissism or a developmental line for the modulation of power and that sort of thing. Because I think he thought people who wanted to talk about power, they were Adlerians. But yes, you can't look at the iconography in mythology and not see kings and queens. That's I don't have time tonight to talk about the way in which I began to look at the way these different systems related. But I first learned. I was totally interested in the magician archetype, psychology of the occult, trying to follow Jung. And then I got exposed to the work of John Perry, who was doing work on the archetypal king stuff in personality, the coronation rituals in people's unconscious. And then I began to realize, well, if you've got a magician and you've got a king, then I began to look at this a lot of the comparative mythology, and there's always a knight, and there's always a troubadour, and I began to look into a lot of different mythological patterns and realize that there was more to the king and queen than just representing the sacred marriage in the psyche. So let's see. We have a few more minutes. Yes, go ahead. Ask a question.
Is integration very cross-culturally? With all that work
Well, that would be my assumption is this: that every human being has to learn to deal with their aggression, and whether or not they're going to become a responsible steward of their aggression. And that every human being has to come to terms with knowledge and how they're going to use their knowledge. I can't imagine a human being that wouldn't have to do that. And every human being, no matter what race, no matter what cultural background, is going to have to deal with the vicissitudes of attachment and affiliation and relationship and sexuality. And every human being is going to have to struggle with the question of whether or not they can claim a sense of their own personal power. And that would be true. I would find it odd for anyone to suggest that any human being would not have to address those four developmental agendas. So as to how these things, how it's quite clear to me that in different cultures, different individuals would get socialized. It wouldn't matter what the culture was. Different individuals would not develop those four powers symmetrically, perfectly. So, in other words, every human being has to find ways to have these potentials nurtured, no matter what culture they're in. So, I think that in terms of statistical manifestation of these different patterns in a culture, that would be an empirical question. And there's no doubt that a culture will influence which, in both genders, which energies get blessed and which ones don't. And you can just think about that in your life. What did your culture do to the way these energies were either ignored or suppressed or blessed in you? So that's an excellent, wonderful question. I wish there was more time for us to discuss it. Yes, over here.
Speaking of Republican culture, can you help me understand?
Speaking of what?
Republican culture. Can you help me understand George Bush, Dick Cheney, and Sarah Palin?
I probably could. I probably could. I mean, I spent a lot of time talking about the Bill Clinton configuration, and we don't have time tonight for me to go into that. But it would be quite clear that Cheney has a huge flooding of dominance energies, right? So the Republicans tend to be much more comfortable with coercion. So what's that? What archetypal systems are those? King and warrior, or queen and warrior. Believe it or not, there's some women that I don't know whether you met them, but I've worked with them who have the same configuration. So I think, for example, Bill Clinton was someone who had a lot of royal energy. He cared about people. He tried to impress a vision. He had a vision. He tried to impress it. Clearly, he was a smart man. Had a lot of magician energy. And I guess you would say he had a load of lover energy, right? Now, what Bill Clinton's problem was, even though he certainly had achieved a lot and had, when you're looking at the intrapsychic dynamics of a particular particular personality, it's how they're balanced internally that matters. And it's quite clear that Bill Clinton was not very well organized in the warrior sector. He had Hillary to carry that in the relationship, and his immaturity in Clinton's immaturity in the warrior sector was expressed by the way that he was constantly raging at his staff and people in the intimate. So people that are into being rageaholics have not got their warrior systems regulated. So you can think about any politician or any personality in the light of these things. And if you see something that's extremely one-sided, you see a personality that really has not very much capacity for empathy and not much capacity for inclusive nurture, well then you know that they've got immature appropriations of some of these systems. So, but there's a lot you could work with on that. So, very interesting question. We're out of time here. Does somebody else have one more question? I'll try to comment. Yes, Becky.
It's just to clarify.
Yeah.
The model that you have in the screen.
Yes.
And it's about the top of the pyramid.
Yes.
And as we move through the various images, the top remains white. And it's as though in a kind of epiphany-like event, the wholeness arrives.
No.
And I know for economy of space and so on and so forth. But say something about shading, because I'm thinking as a person grows and this model
That's right.
is used as a symbol of that growth.
Yes.
that you could have, along the way, some of these circles appearing on the top of the pyramid.
Yes.
In other words, there's a bleeding.
Yes.
Is
Yes.
that-
That's right.
accurate?
That's right. And when you work with any individual around this, you're trying to get a sense about the way in which, in different times of their life, where they access these energies and so on. The model here, I'm just trying to model the development toward optimal organization. The question is there some wobbling as you go through individuation process in these different sectors? Yes, indeed. And so your structure right at this particular point in your life may be different from the way it was when you were in your 30s. And so, so if you're working and looking at an individual, you'd have to think about whether in their life, was there a time that they had an energy really well accessed and regulated? Or was that energy dominant for them in that period? And so absolutely, as you're looking at someone's development as a self, you'd want to have a sense of the history of their capacity to enter these different areas and to regulate them and balance them. There's no doubt about that. Yes, indeed. So this is not to be read as a trajectory that everyone goes through, because in my teaching what I try to do is to show how different people come in through different quadrants and find ways to gradually access the other things that they've left out in their life. And that's what my work offers is a way to get much more low altitude in terms of how archetypal energies work in the psyche and how they relate to one's personal struggle, and to get a sense for how these impersonal archetypal forces force their way in, and if one is not aware of them and one cannot take conscious action to try to relate to them in a thoughtful, creative way, then those forces will not lead you to your optimal integration. Hopefully one finds adequate insight and guidance to be able to begin to continue to integrate these different potentials. So I want to thank you for coming here tonight. Tomorrow I'll be talking about the way in which a lot of these different dynamics, how they relate to the experience of optimal personality function, and some of the traps and some of the things that keep us away from optimal personality function and experiences of flow and ecstasy.
This concludes a Neo-Jungian mapping of the psyche, understanding inner geography and our challenge of individuation. This lecture by Dr. Robert Moore is part of the Bollingen Lecture Series presented by the C.G. Jung Association of Central Ohio. Published by Is Productions, Chicago, Illinois in 2010. Copyright 2009 by Robert Moore. All rights reserved. The companion seminar, Archetypes and Ecstasy, Archetypal Energies and the Quest for Optimal Experience, is also available from Is Publications. For additional information about Robert Moore's theory of personal spiritual transformation, or to order similar audio or video publications, please visit www.robertmoore-phd.com.